Keith Perkins, whose father raised hogs, said, "You seen that new boy? That new boy sticks out like a polka dot pig." "He's a yeller dog," said Pat Hutchinson, known by everyone in town as Hutch, or Little Hutch, if they didn't want to confuse him with his father. "Over where he comes from, them people eat dog. I swear it's true." The new boy's name was Tran. He was Vietnamese, which meant in the small farming community of Skeene, Kentucky, that he might as well have been a polka dot pig. The only foreigner that Skeene had ever seen that anyone could recall was the wife the Gurdonson boy brought home from Germany when he was stationed there in the service. The one with the blonde hair and the mole on her cheek. Her name was Gretchen. She didn't stay around long. They moved to Chicago. I heard she and the Gurdonson boy later broke up, which wasn't much of a surprise to anyone in Skeene. He was a wild one before he ever went into the Army. So Tran was really quite unprecedented for Skeene. No one knew what to make of him, not even the Andersons, the family he was living with. Dave Anderson was the principal of the high school. He'd established the International Student Exchange Program, thinking it would broaden the experience of the local youngsters, many of whom were severely provincial, to put it in the kindest possible way. But Dave Anderson had envisioned a young man from France or a young lady from Holland, someone who could speak English, was worldly, outgoing, personable, a student ambassador who would have no trouble fitting in with the high school crowd, not this complete foreigner who looked so out of place and spoke not a single word anyone could understand. Even in the Anderson home, everyone was uncomfortable. Dave Anderson did the best he could, decided to call the boy Dan, thinking that might make him feel less foreign, at least to the people in Skeene. According to my thinking, it had to make the boy feel more lost than ever. If he came as a shock to Skeene, it was hard to imagine what Skeene must be like to him. Tran acted almost like a prisoner. He kept his head down, his eyes fixed to the floor, and his shoulders hunched over, as if he was expecting a blow from behind. His hair was straight and black as pitch. His eyes were the same color, though no one could see them, as they were always fixed on the ground. Word about him spread quickly through the school. He was new, he was different, he was Oriental, he was from Vietnam. There was nothing else like him in town. All eyes were on him wherever he went. No one hit him, but the effect of all those stares must have been like a beating. Tran was slightly built, almost delicate in his features, and he hunched even more as he walked around the school, as if to protect himself from those prying eyes. Many of the students were curious, but others were filled with that irrational hatred of anything that was different that can spring up in a small town like Ragweed. The fathers of many of the children, having fought in the Vietnam War, still felt an abiding resentment toward that country and its people. To them, Tran was a reminder, an irritant in an old, unhealed wound. He rode the bus to school in the morning. He was the fourth person to board, the only one at the second stop. As he walked along the aisle of the bus, he looked up to choose a seat, and I smiled at him. "My name is Andy Wessel, and I live in Skeene. My real name is Adrian, but everybody has always called me Andy. My daddy wanted a boy, and he's the one who started calling me Andy. I was a sophomore then and pretty much of a tomboy, although I will add that Charlie Davis, captain of the Skeene Eagles football team, asked me to go to the prom that year." When Tran saw me smiling at him, he could hardly believe his eyes. It was the first friendly gesture he'd seen from an American his own age since arriving in the country. Automatically, and with a great sense of relief, he returned the smile and shyly sat down on the seat next to me. I said something to him, just a simple greeting, but he did not understand, so he kept his head down, his shoulders hunched, and we rode the rest of the way to school in silence. I felt sorry for him, but there wasn't much I could do. Making a scene on the bus would only draw attention to him, and I knew he didn't want that. At lunch, I saw Tran in the cafeteria, standing alone by the wall. He noticed me too, so I smiled and waved. He returned both gestures, though timidly. He reminded me of some bird that has hurt its wing and needs nursing. I walked over to him and spoke to him again, repeating what I'd said on the bus. "Hello, how are you?" He thought I must be asking him his name. Shyly he said, "Tran," his voice barely audible. I couldn't understand him. "Do you speak any English?" I said. Tran shook his head, but not because he understood my question. We were standing side by side, but we were worlds apart. Then he took a pen out of his pocket. Making sure the point was retracted, he scratched that word on the brick wall behind him, T-R-A-N, and pointed to himself. I realized it had to be his name. I did my best to pronounce his name, and he shook his head, happy as a puppy, delighted to hear someone speak his name. All he heard at the Andersons was Dan, and Dan was someone else, not him. Then he handed me his pen and pointed to the wall. I scratched my name next to his and said, "Andy." Tran smiled and nodded, took the pen and scratched more lines in the brick. When he was done, he pointed to the lines he'd made and pointed to me and said clumsily, "Andy." I understood that he had written my name in his own language, and that this writing on the wall had made us friends. We knew each other now. I helped him get his lunch and ate at the same table he did. That afternoon I was given a note in one of my classes. I was to report to the school counselor, Mrs. DeMott. Mrs. DeMott had seen me talking with Tran in the lunchroom and wanted to know if I would be willing to tutor him in English. I wasn't sure. It sounded like an enormous undertaking to teach someone a new language. It had taken us half an hour to just learn to speak our names. I had no experience teaching anyone anything, much less teaching someone how to speak a new language. Also, I was busy with classes and girls' basketball team. I asked Mrs. DeMott if I could think it over. That night on the bus, Tran sat down beside me again. When the bus left school, it was nearly filled. We were hardly off school property when a voice from the back, a boy's voice, shouted out, "Hey, who's the gook with Andy?" Many people laughed. Tran seemed to freeze and almost quiver with fear, even though he kept his eyes down and did not move. He could not understand the words, but he knew they were laughing at him, and he could hear the sneering sarcasm in the way the words were spoken. "Hey, who's the gook, Andy?" The voice shouted out louder. I knew that voice. It was Keith Perkins, a stupid boy. Other voices called out, "What's a gook doing on this bus anyway?" one said. "We don't need no slant eyes around here," said another. I felt my face flush with anger. I recognized all those voices. Stupid, cruel boys, and proud of it. "Hey, gook, you putting a move on Andy?" the first voice said. "Hey, what's the matter, gookie? Can't you answer? Cat got your tongue?" I'd heard enough. Such cowards shouting at a lone stranger. I wheeled around in my seat and threw myself back over the next seat, grabbed the shirt of Bill Lankin, a fat boy everybody called Lanky. Though others were still shouting and laughing, I pulled on Lanky's shirt and screamed, "Leave him alone! How can you treat him this way? You cowards! You bullies!" shouting out names behind his back. "You should be ashamed of yourselves, and you would be, if you weren't all such jerks." I let go of Lanky's shirt and returned to my seat, glaring at the faces in the seats, daring them to speak. The bus was silent except for the sound of the engine and the tires. I was so angry I thought I might cry, but I bit my lip because I didn't want to give those jerks the satisfaction of seeing me in tears. Tran meekly turned his head and looked over at me, then bowed his head in a gesture of thanks. I vowed then to myself that I would help him learn English, even if I had to quit the basketball team. The way I looked at it, Skeen was either part of the world and could accept anybody, or it was a rotten redneck preview of hell, where if you were different at all, you were damned. It wasn't as hard as I expected. Mrs. DeMott gave me a number of helpful books, and the Andersons only lived 2 blocks away, so Tran was able to come over to her house to study 3 nights a week. At first we were bogged down in vocabulary, and sentences and grammar seemed impossible, but Tran was diligent, if not brilliant, and by the end of the semester he had learned enough language to speak it haltingly and pass his classes. There were no further incidents on the bus, and after the novelty wore off, Tran became just another student in the school. Everyone called him Dan, everyone except me, and one day he said to me, "It's okay, Andy, you can call me Dan too." "Are you sure?" "Yes, I don't mind." So I did. The adults and girls went out of their way to help Tran, but the boys just sort of tolerated him, didn't give him any trouble, but never included him in any of their thrilling endeavors, like going out on beer runs and tossing silver bullets and tossing toilet paper in the trees. Tran once said to me, I would do anything if they would just like me, accept me.